I am Delmar Rouse, and I'm here to interview Supreme Court Judge D. Bruce Crew, the third, yes, for the purpose of completing the requirement that will satisfy a project for the Chemung County Historical Society, which will deal with the oral history of Chemung County and the surrounding areas. This interview is taking over the third, 10 o'clock approximately, at the Auditor's office. Pete, I would like to first have you respond to the question as to when did your family first come to the area?
My father's side of the family came here in approximately 1880 or 1890. 80 or 1890. I know that because I just got a receipt the other day from a friend of mine. His great-grandmother got a receipt from the Elmira Arms Company. It's dated 1896 for some work that was done. So my grandfather came here in the late 80s, I think. He then became a partner with John Willis, the Willis Jeep firm.
Yes.
And they opened the Elmira Arms Company as partners. The late 80s or very early 90s. And my father went to college in Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania, and then came back here and went into the Arms Company with my grandfather. On my mother's side, my grandfather came here in the late teens or early mid-20s from Ohio. I believe Massillon, Ohio, but I'm not sure. He came from Ohio. He became the Secretary-Treasurer of the American and France Company, and was in that position for a good number of years until he died very prematurely, I think in his late 40s. And that's how my family got here on my mother's side.
If I was to ask you, if you could tell me what you thought brought them here, had you heard them discuss that ever? What brought your people here?
Cantor, my mother's father, was very simple. He came here because of American and France.
Right.
He came here to take a position of Secretary-Treasurer of that company.
Right.
And their home offices are right here in Elmira, New York. My grandfather Crew settled here somewhat by happenstance. He was a salesman. He was born and brought up in Philadelphia. A very large family. I think there were 13 or 14 people in his family. And he was a salesman. He was on the road all the time. And one of the places where he sold was right here in Chemung County. He used to stay at the Flangwell, I believe.
Nice.
And he just saw this as a very good opportunity for opening a retail type of business. And that's how that happened. Somewhat happenstance. He traveled all over the eastern seaboard as a salesman. Picked this place to sell.
That's interesting. Now, you referred to your mother's people, their last name is Cantor?
Cantor, A-N-T-E-R. Orley Cantor.
Very good. I want to be sure I have the spellings because this will be transcribed.
Right.
Okay. Now, what about yourself? When, let's move into your early education. Where did you attend Where did you attend elementary school?
I went to Henry Avenue from kindergarten right through the 8th grade. Then I left Elmira and went to prep school, Culver Military Academy.
Culver?
Indiana, CULV years. I graduated from Culver and attended Colgate University. Graduated from Colgate University, married my wife Frances, and went to Albany Law School, where she worked full time to put me through law school.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Now, what about yourself? When did you attend elementary school? Where did you attend elementary school? When did you attend elementary school?
I went to Henry Avenue
Yeah, I'm curious. You went to a private military school, was that? For your high school? How did you feel about maybe missing some of the opportunity of going to high school like in Elmira? Wasn't that a factor for you?
It wasn't then.
Mm.
I was looking very much forward to going to college. It is now, in retrospect, in later years. There were an awful lot of people who I missed because I didn't go to become friendly with you yourself.
Right.
A number of people like that, but there are dozens upon dozens who are friends of my old childhood friends from Hendy, who I never knew.
Is that right?
And it left a void in my relationships throughout the community. So now, in retrospect, I miss my relationships throughout the community. So now, in retrospect, I miss having not had that experience. On the other hand, I must be very frank. My most wonderful memories were Culver, of all the schools I ever attended. And two of my children went there also.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
But I do miss the wise had. I've been sort of playing catch-up for 30 years.
Well, you've answered several questions in that response that I had listed here. I would like to maybe ask a couple of things that are not on there. I'd like to know whether, did you take vacations here at home? And if so, were you able then to interact with some of the other young people at the time you were at Culver?
Well, yes, spring vacations, Christmas vacations were almost all but two occasions were taken right here in Elmira.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, that's a very short period of time. The other thing is my family, my father, had a summer home at Cuca Lake. I had a summer home at Cuca Lake that my grandfather acquired in 1936. As a result, all of my growing up years in the summer were spent at Cuca Lake. So that, again,
you went right.
It was very detrimental for me because not only were community.
Right.
That's why I say I played catch-up for 30 years here in Elmira.
Well, perhaps you could respond to a question of what was your perception of Elmira back then? Since you weren't living here, but when you would come by, your family was here. Did you have any kind of specific feeling about this being your home?
Oh yeah.
There?
Oh yeah. Did then, do now. Contrary to an awful lot of, I'm afraid, young people today, and I viewed Elmira as a interesting, fun place with a lot of opportunity for young people. I always enjoyed being here when I was going through Hendy. I enjoyed coming back when I was in prep school. Thought as to anything else except that I would eventually return to Elmira and make it my home. It was always home to me.
And as you alluded to, a lot of young people don't feel that way.
Oh, not at all. None of my children do.
Right.
All four feel quite to the contrary. This is the last place in the world. So they say. It's the last place in the world.
Right.
Quite to the contrary. This is the last place in the world. So they say. It's the last place in the world.
Right.
So that's
Eventually, I'm trying to work into when in your recollection can you recall the first time to either interact with the minority community of Elmira or had an impression about their existence and what their lot was, so to speak?
Oh, that's very easy for me. You should be interviewing Jack McLeod, too. It's very easy for both of us.
Yes, I know Jack.
That would have been time, approximately, but sometime in the mid-40s. I began playing small fry football, small fry basketball, small fry baseball, as did Jack, and my father's small fry baseball, as did Jack. And my father's store, the Arms Company, sponsored several teams. And I began going to the Nave very, very frequently. I'd say around 10 or 11 or 12. And I enormously strong friendships in the minority community. And I did that very early on. I can remember playing Mount Nebo and getting skinned.
That's interesting. You see, even though I go like you go to around the 70s, I had a basic feeling about you when you were serving on the board. And I knew then that you had some previous experience. I didn't know what it was. Okay, very good. Let's talk a little bit about when you came back and your first employment, your first job.
Let's see. You mean after formal schooling?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, when I got out of law school, I clerked for a Supreme Court justice in Ithaca for about a year and a half, almost 2 years, and then came directly back to Elmira and became an associate in the law firm of Sales, Evans, Brayton, Palmer, and Tip. And I was with them went over to Donovan, Granard, Davidson, and Burns. I was an associate there. I believe it was 1965, maybe 66. I think it was 65 until 68. And 68, I became a partner in that firm. And 68, I became a partner in that firm. And I remained a partner until 1973, when Governor Rockefeller appointed me district attorney of Chemung County. And then, of course, I was district attorney for 10 years until I became a Supreme Court justice. Until I became a Supreme Court justice.
Your friends that you have met, your minority friends, your black friends that you have met earlier on when you were younger, were you able or were you aware of their progress in the employment world or in their living style at all when you were going through your career mobility?
Well, not really as a youngster, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. And I can't say as I had a very sophisticated awareness of social grouping, economic grouping. I mean, I was at the Nave a great deal. I interacted with many of my friends down there. It didn't to me whatsoever. And money didn't play any role down there. I mean, and the same thing in the small fry fields when we played football. So I can't say that in those days that I had any particular awareness as to whether or not members of the black community had good job benefits. I mean, of course, I know now that they didn't, but I didn't know that then. It was not the kind of thing that we ever really discussed in any fashion. I don't think I became aware of anything of that sort whatsoever vis-a-vis my own community. I don't mean I became community. I don't mean I became socially aware of that sort of thing late in high school and early in college. But with regard to my own community, I don't think I really became substantially aware of those kinds of things until I came back here to make it my home.
Age, and I'm a there down there too. But I don't really remember a trolley line. Do you recall a trolley line ever being in Elmira?
No. I do, however, recall in many areas of the city the old tracks.
The tracks.
When I was a kid.
Right.
And they were
tracks.
When I was a kid.
Right.
And they were all over the place. I can recall those quite well, but I do not personally recall an actual operating trolley.
We're in the same boat there. Okay. I take it your family were in the Second World War.
Yeah.
Did the war itself play any specific kind of impact on your family in terms of members of your family having to participate in the war, or just react to what it did to not only the nation but our community?
Well, I remember that.
Yes.
I mean, I can remember the eclipse. I can remember gasoline rationing. I can remember the blackouts. I can remember my father going around the neighborhood as a volunteer with a flashlight, being sure that everybody is properly blacked out. 4H or 4F or something like that. He couldn't go in. His eyes were terrible, and they wouldn't accept him. He volunteered, they wouldn't take him. My uncle didn't go in, but was close to it. He was doing what they call a V8 program or something like that at Cornell. V8 program or something like that at Cornell. Scholarship kind of thing for the Navy. But I remember the war years very, very, very well. And I remember that that it was a source of thorough upheaval in the community. I think not anywhere near so much as my wife experienced it. She was in Washington at the time, and there, I mean, for them it was very, very, very real and very scary, very scary. When they had an air raid, they really were concerned that maybe they were going to be bombed. I don't believe that I never felt that way in Elmira. I just knew that it was inconveniencing everybody in terms of the rationing, in terms of people being called away to the service. My next door neighbor's father was taken into service. I mean, that sort of thing.
I'm trying to find an area or a specific event which you may be able to respond to as how it related to our community in terms of racial, and perhaps you do the flood of 1946.
Yeah, vaguely, I do remember, but very vaguely.
Right. Just vaguely.
Yeah.
Right. So that may not be what I'm looking for.
I was 9 at that time. I mean, I recall it. My father had a business downtown. I remember seeing pictures of he and Howie Smith going through the front door in a canoe. And Howie Smith going through the front door in a canoe.
I remember being in a canoe leaving my home.
Oh, do you really?
Yes.
Yeah, see, it didn't hit us.
Yes, right, but it did us. I just thought maybe that. Then following that, they came in with the flood projects and there was moving around in terms of homes and relocation, that kind of thing. Some of these questions I didn't think were apropos to you. And I had some other ones that I wanted to ask. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the community organizations that you have belonged to since during your career, your life in the community, that you felt aided in any way community relations among the people? Community relations among the people.
Oh, well, the Navy, of course. I was on the board there for a long time. I don't remember how many years, but it was a good long while. I have to think hard about this. It goes way back. The demands of my time were so awful that I really got out of civic stuff. But I was on the Catholic Family Services. Child and Family Services. I was a member of that board for a long time. Elmira Little Theater. I was a member of that, president of it. I don't remember. There were a number of other ones.
Let's talk a little bit about the tenure that you spent as a board member of the Neighborhood House, because that's significant for both of us. When I came to the board, to the Neighborhood House in 1970, nationwide it was a very tense time.
Oh, yes.
Because of the civil rights movement, the revolts, and the chaos that was going across the nation. We had some effects of that locally. We had some effects of that locally. I wonder if you could spend a minute to just kind of reacting to your perception of what was taking place locally in respect to what's happening nationally. What's happening nationally.
Well, my recollection is that while there was response locally from the black community concerning these issues, that it was nowhere as virulent, aggressive as it was basically nationwide. But I think that has been, that was reflective of how I've pretty much seen this community for years. We've been very, very fortunate in this community. We've essentially, at least from my perspective, of course, I do come from a little bit different background.
Yeah, that's why we're talking.
Than a lot of people. But from my perspective, there's been extremely good black-white community relations here in this community over the years. I mean, extremely good. There's not been the enormous distrust that I perceived from reading and even from being in other locations. So that, while there's no, I don't think that that it posed the difficult problems between white and blacks as a group as it did in other places.
You were a district attorney during those years. In your role as a district attorney, how did you find yourself responding to the minorities with respect to their being involved with crime and that kind of thing? Did you see an increase? Did you feel that the ones that you had to deal with were those that were not really making an attempt to become a contributing member of our community? Or didn't you notice that there was maybe an imbalance with the types of cases you found yourself having to deal with or situations?
Oh, no. I mean, I've always been aware of that. I was aware of that from the very first. Indeed, there was and still is an imbalance in terms of numbers of defendants from the black and white communities. There absolutely is. When you consider the percentage of blacks in this community and the percentage of whites, there's an enormous disparity. And the percentage of whites, there's an enormous disparity in the percentages of defendants who are black and white compared to their relative communities. Oh, I was very, very much aware of that. We were talking about my thinking in terms of disparity, if any, socially, economically, and I told you that I really had none when I was a youngster. That's the first time that I began to perceive that indeed there was a disparity, a very real one. I became. That's the first time I became genuinely concerned about that sort of situation, and still am.
Right.
Very, very definitely.
Do you feel generally within the community that there's been a positive change or a move in a positive direction between the blacks and the whites and the minorities and the larger community? And just sort of generally speaking.
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, the answer to that is yes, as it is pretty much nationwide. There has been a difference. There has been a change. it's in a change. It's demonstrative. It's observable. I don't know that it has been sufficient. In fact, I'm certain that it has not. I mean, what the hell? We don't have one black doctor in this community. We don't have one black lawyer in this community. Those are the kinds of things we need in order to really, really impact on a community in this way. Role models for children, all that sort of thing. We don't have that. That's a real problem. But yes, there has people like Jack McLeod and I were considered sort of kind of strange people when I was in high school and college. We were really considered sort of off the wall.
Because of your
because our very close relationships with black people, I mean, that was considered strange in our days. It's not now, not at all. It may still be. It is still. It's not now, not at all. It may still be. It is still in some quarters, but nothing like it was when we were kids. I mean, when we were kids, that really was considered unusual to have those kinds of close friendships, those kinds of associations on a very regular basis. That was a very unusual thing when I was a kid.
Attribute to the fact that we have found such a difficult time in trying to attract black professionals into our community. I mean, there's some positives here if you can look down the road.
I have a hunch. I mean, why it is. I think the problem is when you try to get a black doctor to come here or a black lawyer, and I'm not being facetious, they all of a sudden become a token. They're on an island all by themselves. I mean, they have no like professionals with whom they can associate, and I suspect that that's somewhat of an uncomfortable feeling for them, and particularly for their children. I think that's probably a very uncomfortable feeling. So that I suspect that they would much prefer to move to a community that is more amalgamated with blacks and whites and professionals, a more sophisticated, if you will, type community, larger community, probably wealthier community, than this. I think that's the problem. I really do think that's a problem.
What about the receptivity on the part of the white community for some improvement in this specific area? Do you think that there's a lot of opposition to that?
No, I don't. I think it's almost as bad as that. In fact, you can make an argument that it's worse than that. I don't think that there's opposition. I think that there is no thought about it at all. I think that there's a lackadaisical feeling about that people aren't, as I say, you can make an argument that's even worse than having people who are vocal and opposed to it, at least willing to talk about it.
Right.
I think it's a failure to recognize the importance of that sort of thing.
As an attorney, offer an opinion for me as to what impact you feel the amendments that we talked about may have had in being responsible for positive movement. Between racial relationships, nationwide as well as locally. You know, the 13th to 14th.
Well,
had we not had those in place, for example, where would we might be, or where would we be, or could be at this point?
As an entity, quite obviously, our history was not that dramatic. I mean, it didn't have that. The impact that occurred was the impact of the people in the late 60s and 70s, the black race, who took it upon themselves to be damn sure that that had some meaning, and then a response during the same period of time a little earlier by the Warren Court. I mean, it was those factors really. Of course, you had to have that in place so that they could decide cases based so that they could decide cases based upon it. But
Right.
I don't think it was until the 60s and 70s that they had really substantial meaning, bringing about some meaningful equality and an opportunity for with all the amendments that you speak of. It was they were begrudgingly given, and at the time that they were given, they were nothing but pieces of paper. But eventually, people decided that they should be more than that, and when that happened, then documents.
Wow. This has been interesting. I have wondered over the years, the time that I had at the neighborhood house, I felt a host of different things coming from what we refer to as the larger community versus our own minority community, and the fact that out of the 13 plus years I was there, most of the time I thought I was caught in the middle, that there was no winning or no losing, because we wanted different things.
Yeah.
And because we wanted different things.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the blacks did not have the wherewithal to really get what they wanted, and was still dependent in some respects to the larger community.
Oh, yes.
On the other hand, as the effects to the larger community.
Oh, yes.
On the other hand, as a part of the community, they should have the right to unity, that there was almost no way to win. And that's unfortunate. I'm wondering, now that I know a little bit more about what you have done working at a higher level with the legal system, and in your travel, I understand you spent quite a bit of time in the city.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What is your perception of how well can a black and white work together in this kind of arena?
In this community or generally?
Well, generally, and then bring it down to this community.
Yeah, well, because it makes a difference.
Yes.
In New York City, for instance, in that regard, they've made enormous advances. I mean, enormous advances. I recall, when I go back just because the example, I recall once when I was home from vacation from Culver, and I had born brought up in Winona, Mississippi. Now, mind you, we're talking back in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And we were walking down the street in Penn Yan, and a black boy and a white girl walked by, and I thought that Ronnie would have a fit. I mean, really, he was angry. He was very, very angry. That kind of behavior, nobody looks at it with any kind of chagrin at all. I mean, it simply is an absolutely acceptable behavior. Nothing, that's not to say there aren't pockets that don't think that,
right.
but it causes not a stir when you walk down the street. And that tells you a great deal. In larger cities of that sort around the country, in some, you might say, in more sophisticated areas around the country, if you get up to Ithaca, where you've got 2 universities on campus and very liberal kinds of thinking people associated with those universities, you find in places like that there's an enormous, genuine acceptance of minorities, not just blacks. We're talking about Asians. We're talking about any kind of minority. The majority with whites, without it's commonplace, and there's not even a thought that way. They simply associate. So there's been tremendous gains in that regard. On the other hand, when you move into somewhat rural areas, and I consider Elmira a rural area compared to what I've been talking about,
Right.
We've not made that kind of advancement at all. The fact of the matter is, it doesn't go unnoticed. It's very noticed.
Very sensitive.
Extremely sensitive. So in that regard, we have a long, long way to go here.
Really interesting to talk to you like this, to talk to you like this, because when we were working together on the board, we didn't have this opportunity.
That's the toughest thing I ever had to do, Del.
Even though we were at a sensitive time, particularly because of the
very
building and the attitudes and
Well,
the
if you remember-
institution that
If you
we
remember
went
Charlie,
through, the attitudes and
well,
the
if you remember-
institution that
if you
we
remember
went
Charlie Comer,
Uh-huh.
I mean, a remarkable man, to this day. I
Mhm.
admire him enormously, just a remarkable man.
Mhm.
But it wasn't Charlie, it was the symbol.
Mhm.
That was not the person to run the
That's
neighborhood
right.
house then,
That's
not
right.
in those years. That was
Exactly.
not the time for a
That's
run the neighborhood
right.
house then,
That's
not in
right.
those years. That was
Exactly.
not the time for a
Exactly.
white person to be running the neighborhood house.
Right.
And it was a very, very difficult thing to do because I loved the man, but it was very important to do.
Yes, yes. It takes a lot of special people to do, at the right time to do a job to make advancement take place. Well, that's very interesting. It's similar to the time when I was in the service. And in 1963, I was one of the troops that was sent into the University of Alabama.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Were you really?
I was also in Germany, in the Berlin crisis.
Yeah.
You know, in Germany versus here.
Oh, yeah.
And I had another very interesting experience in that I was supposed to be in Germany for 18 months, but about 9 months after we were there, my commander came out and said that the entire unit was going to be replaced by an entire unit from the United States, and we're going to take that place in the United States. And that place will be in Fort Benning, Georgia. Well, you know, for me, that was very significant.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and I saw some attitudes that I just did not believe exist, even though you read about it, you heard about it. They're there. They were there back in the 60s.
Oh, I saw the same thing. I mean,
Right.
As I said, you know what I was like when I was growing up here as a youngster, and then go to college with my friend in Winona, Mississippi,
Oh, wow.
in 1952, I believe. It may have been 3.
Uh-huh.
And I want to tell you, that was some unbelievable experience for me. I mean, the things I saw and the things I heard down there, I couldn't believe. I mean, I'd never been subject to that sort of thing. It was absolutely unbelievable.
So many of us, each of us bring to whatever our feelings are, a host of experiences that shape those up. And I think what we're trying to do with this project is to get attitudes and feelings and responses from both sides of the community, as to how they see Elmira fitting into the total scheme of things as it relates to the racial relations, the progress or lack of it. I don't think anybody would say there's none. I think people may be unhappy with the rate.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that kind
Sure.
of thing. And I've been curious because to me, being a native Elmiran, there's still places that seems to be essentially untouched by at any significant level. One or two may find yourself there doing some things.
Oh, sure. I can tell you a place. I can tell you a place I remember. I don't know if Fran ever told you this, but I remember we had a young fellow. He's no longer a young fellow. He will graduate next year. Started coming with us. Freddie Fenner, Braxton Fenner, started coming to us. The early 70s. And when he came here, obviously he's very black young man. And I remember that first summer. We went up to the club. We took him up to the club. We took him over to the swimming pool. We wanted to get him swimming lessons. The swimming coach there, thank God, was a fine man. He was wonderful, wonderful, Freddie. Indeed, taught him how to swim. He was wonderful, wonderful, Freddie. Indeed, taught him how to swim. But we were told about 3 days after we started that that was absolutely not acceptable. He was not a guest. Not a member of my household. As as such, he was not allowed there. And as such, he was not allowed there. And my wife, I've never seen her so goddamn mad. She went to the board and she raised holy hell. That was the end of that. He learned how to swim, and he's been there ever since. But those are the kinds of problems that occur. That was a real shock.
I can remember after the flood, '72, Mayor Lowell at the time told me to the UBC committee, and I was the only black on the committee, and I always felt it. And after the meeting would break up, and someone would be quite lengthy because we didn't get a lot of issues. All the other members but myself would go across the street to the City Hall.
The
City Club, rather, the City Club.
Yep.
And I felt, why am I really here? I don't belong here because economically I don't fit. I have not reached that status. And yet I've been out here a long time, and I know the community from my perspective, and I probably could add. But you always felt that you're giving, but for what and to what?
Yeah.
And for what and to what?
Yeah.
And if there was any real long-term benefits for you as a person or you as a member of a specific community.
Of course, you look back on it, you know damn well that there were and there are.
Oh, yeah,
but it's still very frustrating.
But at the time, you mentioned Fran, your wife, and I was absolutely amazed to find out where she was from originally. There's no way.
Doesn't act like that, does she?
No, I would not have banked on that for nothing. That is really tremendous. I think that's probably the best testimony that I can attest for being able to grow and to understand and process what's going on around them.
Yeah.
And put it in a realistic perspective. She is really something else.
She's quite a lady.
Yeah. Really.
She says what she means, and she means what she says.
That's good. Well, Pete, I really appreciate you giving me this time. I think I've covered all the areas I'm supposed to. Is there anything else that you'd like to say by way of summing up some of the feelings you may have about Elmira, Chemung County, and what we may or may not have accomplished over the last 40
No,
years,
I
maybe?
don't think so. As you probably gather, my feelings about my community are very strong. I've never been unhappy that I came back here. I would do it all over again if I had the choice to do it again. I think it's a wonderful community to raise a family. I think minority relations, but we've got a long, long, long way to go. But I don't think in that respect we're a lot different than anybody else in communities this size around the country. We have ages to go. It'll be decades before it's the way you and I would like to believe it should be.
You can't argue with that. Well, thanks very much for the time.
More than